10 o'clock. I'm going to get started. So hopefully we can get through everything and leave some time for questions at the end. So I am Eileen Anderson. I am the School Library System Director and Library Automation Supervisor at Erie One BOCES. And I've been in this role since April. Prior to this role, I was the school librarian at Fillmore Central School in Allegheny County, New York. So I'm from Western New York, not originally, but transplant here after college. And while I was a school librarian, I took on a more technological role and even took a break from the school library for 3 years, where I was able to kind of do tech classes and spearhead computer science initiatives at that district. It was a small district of only 700 students, K-12. So I was able to work with all students at all levels. I was also on the review panel for the computer science and digital fluency standards, and kind of brought that perspective of librarians into the mix. I posted my link in the chat as well for all my resources. They are in Wakelet. It includes the slide deck, and it also includes the slide deck, my contact information, another Wakelet of computer science and digital fluency resources that I used, and then a trade book list that I have created. So I'm just making sure. Oh, in addition, I was a first Lego League coach and a VEX robotics coach, and I am a certified FAA pilot. So I've been able to take my experiences with robots and drones and kind of bring that into the library so it's accessible to everybody, and more kids were able to experience robots. I graduated in August with my advanced certificate in educational leadership, and you'll see in a few minutes, as part of my leadership project, I worked with the standards and how to bring them from kind of this almost abstract idea of how are we going to do this in our schools to a practical solution. So by the end of this session, I'm hoping you'll be able to name some ways that the library media specialist can meet these standards, understand the use of the benefits of using trade books to meet these standards, and kind of recognize some next steps. I wanted to give you guys something that you could take either to your librarians, because I see a couple of other directors, and I also see some librarians in here. So I'm excited that you guys are here and ready to listen. So in 2020, before COVID, New York State approved these computer science and digital fluency standards, and they would like them to be implemented by September, full implementation for all grade bands by September of 2024. So there was kind of this game plan of how we were going to introduce it to schools, and of course COVID came and COVID messed everything up. But the vision of these standards is that every student would know how to live productively and safely in a technology-dominated world. So this included understanding the essential features of digital technologies, why and how they work, and how to communicate and create using these technologies. So this can be a challenge because a lot of teachers are like, oh, I'm not a computer science teacher. That's not my area. However, the whole vision for these standards was that it would not be one group of people or one subject area that would be responsible for meeting these standards. It's going to be cross-curricular in all grade bands. Now, some districts are putting that to the librarians, and my librarians are worried about it, but I think it's important to have the conversation that not one person should be expected to meet these standards. Another difficulty is that with New York State creating these standards, they created a computer science certified position, but there's still not a lot of people coming out of school with that certification. And they also have the SOC, where you can get the if you've already been teaching it, you can kind of get the certification for a little while. But there also is the problem that you have kind of teachers who didn't always grow up with technology. They didn't always use it in the classroom, and so they're learning. And sometimes it can be intimidating with students knowing more than teachers when it comes to how to use technology safely. And one of the greatest things I think about when I was teaching computer science is, for me, I was not afraid to say, oh, hey, I made a mistake. We're learning together sometimes. And it allows students to build empathy with each other, so not always having the answer, but it also shows that continuous growth. So this is an image from CS for All, and it was part of a presentation I did with all staff at Fillmore. So it is important to know that the standards are there, what the role is in the school building, but buy-in can be difficult. And like I said, there's the teachers who are like, it's not my problem, I teach English, or it's not my problem, I'm teaching social studies. But really, part of the creating the buy-in is showing that computer science meets can be for all content areas. So it's a shared responsibility, and therefore having a shared vision for why computer science is important for that buy-in. So with this, it talks about what values people have, and the rationale of why this is important. We all know, and especially from the pandemic, that technology is how we were able to kind of stay connected with people from all over the world, but also at school. And technology is making communication easier. So we need to learn how to use it responsibly. But we also have our values as educators. And so CS for All provides a framework that allows teachers to think about their values as an educator, think of the rationales behind why computer science is important, and kind of design together how they're going to implement the computer science standards and the impact it will then have for their students. So as a teacher, our values are that we want to have students learn and be ready for worlds outside of school, whether it be career or college. And computers and technology is going to be part of everybody's life, no matter what they do. So having a good understanding of how to use it and how to use it responsibly is important. So I utilized the CS Visions project and toolkit from CS for All. It is linked in the Wakelet that I shared. I'm going to see if it will let me switch screens. Hold on, I'm going to switch my screen so you can see. Okay, so this is my Wakelet of resources, and I have the CS Visions framework there. It doesn't like, there we go. Okay. So this is a free toolkit that aligns with the white paper, CS for What, Diverse Visions of Computer Science in Education and Practice. And I think that what I really enjoyed about this was it talks about why this is important, but it also has teachers thinking for themselves. And the activity that I did was an unplugged activity. So often when teachers hear computer science, they automatically think they have to be tech savvy and use computers and apps and robots, but that's not the case. And that's kind of where I'm going with this whole presentation is you do not have to be tech savvy to be able to teach these concepts. And so many of these concepts can relate to activities that you can do unplugged or without technology. And what this activity was is it allows teachers to identify visions based off statement cards. And kind of say, oh yeah, that aligns to what I feel, and then narrow it down to a focus. And it was a group activity. It was great. And it helped kind of not only remind teachers why we're teaching. So we always talk about knowing our why, knowing why we're teaching, why computer science is important. And then I was also able to align it to the mission and vision statements of the school district. So this is the purpose that the school has defined why we're here, and we can fit computer science into that vision. So there's a bunch of other resources on CS for All that are also great. So as I kind of briefly mentioned earlier, as part of my educational leadership program, we had to create and lead a collaborative leadership project. And this was part of my work at SUNY Oswego. And my project was to build awareness and capacity for the teachers of the Computer Science and Digital Fluency Learning Standards at Fillmore Central School. I led several professional development sessions with staff, and then I also provided them example lessons for K1. There are a lot of resources out there, and in my Wakelet, I have a link to a separate Wakelet that then goes by standard and gives you content information, lesson ideas. They mentioned in the opening session that there are many different grants out there to allow people to create content. And I kind of organized that all in one into my K1 grade band. So after talking about our vision, we then looked at the grade bands, and many of these teachers had not heard of the standards. They're not familiar with computer science. So the first thing we did was we looked at the standards by grade band. I taught the teachers what standards have met. And at this point, I was not in the library anymore at Fillmore, but I was teaching kind of computer science and robotics and doing a little bit of tech integration with teachers from the pandemic moving forward. And so when teachers see the standards read off, it's very overwhelming. And so my goal was to kind of relieve some of that anxiety that teachers had, like, oh my gosh, there's all these standards I now have to try to fit in addition to ELA, math, social studies, science. And what we were able to do is go through and just identify what we're already doing that are meeting these standards, but we might just have to change our vocabulary around. So I'm going. Give me 1 second because I'm going to open up the K1 grade band. To kind of show you what we did. So this is what a document I created and worked with teachers. We went through each section, concept area, impacts of computing, computational thinking, and network and system design, cybersecurity, and digital literacy. We talked about each concept, what it meant. We read the standards, and then I asked them to type in examples of where they're doing this in their classroom. And a lot of it they already met, but in addition to having them see, oh, hey, we're already kind of doing this, here's how we can change it to fit these standards better, we also identified our weaknesses. And at Fillmore, across all grade bands, our weakness was network and system design and cybersecurity. And that's a common weakness that I see with other schools too. And this is why I say it's difficult for one person to kind of fill the need. And it might be hard for some librarians to fill in network and system design and cybersecurity. So it gave us kind of an idea of where we could work. So I also linked the PowerPoint that I led the instruction of the standards with into the slides. After we did that, I worked on compiling a variety of resources for our teachers. And there was some example lessons. I organized them by standard. I created links in Wakelet by standard band, but then I also created a trade book list by standard band. And that's kind of the focus then for the rest of the session is how do library media specialists fit in here? Because a lot of times people might not know what a librarian does or how they can be successful in supporting curriculum. So a library media specialist, I know I have a lot here from the comments, and I'm sure your librarian in your school district, if it's not you, is able to advocate for what they can do to help. So they are an information literacy teacher. They teach standards-based lessons on how to do research, how to find good sources, and how to be a good digital citizen. So that kind of covers the digital fluency and a little bit of the cybersecurity. An innovation leader. So a lot of times the librarians are the people who are trying out the new technology first, or they're the ones who are taking risks with their lessons and using new things. They are leaders in accessibility, privacy, and digital ethics. And they're using a personalized learning space. The media center can be something that is different for every student, but it's going to fit the need of every student. A media specialist is also an equity champion. They're providing diversity, equity, and inclusion through their collection, through their resources, and it allows students to consider multiple perspectives. So having a collection, either digital or physical, can allow people to see themselves in content or can see others. They are also a resource curator. So they're going to have the new books. They're going to support all the curriculum in the school. And they're partners to instruct in these new digital tools. So whenever teachers have to go into it and try something new, they can have a second adult if they utilize their library media specialist. So they can work together and work with each other's strengths to kind of provide resources in new digital tools, whether it be the new app, the new database, and they can also provide enrichment opportunities. So a lot of libraries have maker spaces, and maker spaces can tie into the computer science and digital fluency standards and give students experiences that they might not have always experienced. So as a library media specialist, how did I use trade books? And how did I incorporate computer science into my classrooms? Especially like elementary was kind of my wheelhouse because they're still learning how to use computers, use iPads. They have experience at home, but they don't always know the best way to do things. And a lot of times I did it through trade books. A trade book is any book that's kind of published for a general audience. It's widely available. It's not our textbooks. It's not our level readers. These are books that we can use alongside content, but it's not that in-depth niche area like a textbook. And trade books are powerful tools for instruction because they can be very high interest, so students can really enjoy the pictures. They might like the subject. It's not something that they're forced to be used, and it can meet their learning styles. So vocabulary growth has been heavily influenced by how much children read, not necessarily the direct instruction of this is the vocabulary word and this is what it means. It's more effective when children are reading or hearing vocabulary used in the actual content that it is associated with. And some people say like, oh, that students need to read, but reading out loud is just as effective in building that vocabulary. And it also helps bridge the gaps for students who might have difficulty reading to still get enjoyment out of the content. So students with limited language experiences, so maybe at home, books are not something that or are being used, or students who are learning English because it is not their first language. Getting books read aloud to them to hear the vocabulary, use pictures as clues for meaning. It's more effective. So this is an equity issue with students because if you're reading out loud in the library setting or in the classroom setting, students are still getting the experience. And then trade books just create an interest in topics. They're exciting to read. It doesn't look like a textbook. They put good pictures and more in there. So I have a couple examples of books that I use, and these are on my trade book list. The trade book list, I'm going to show you quick before I go into the details of what the specific books, but this is a Google Doc, and you can make a copy of it. I know I have a lot of SLS directors, and I've kind of shared it out to a bunch of people, so it's all over the place. But what I did was I created a trade book list by concept area, and I will continue to add books to it. But I separated it by concept area, then by grade band, and then by fiction and nonfiction. So nonfiction is always a huge focus in the elementary and getting students reading nonfiction text. But I also think stories can help teach concepts as well. And so that's why I've included both. And the first one that I'm going to share is Once Upon a Time Online. And this is one that I have used for Digital Citizenship Week. And I did it with, I think, like second and third graders. Depending on your group, you can use it lower or higher. But what I like about this one is it's approachable because many of these students have heard of fairy tale characters. And it goes through all the fairy tale characters. And it's kind of they get given a laptop and they kind of go through the experience of all the great things that can happen when you get a laptop and the internet, and then kind of the bad side and how to solve it. So you could tie it into fairy tale units. You could also tie it into Digital Citizenship Week, but then you can also tie it into media literacy and kind of what is the author's purpose with some of the characters and why they're sharing it. So there's different concept areas that you can focus on and still meet those digital literacy areas. So that's one of my favorites. It's by David Belford and Rosie Reeve, and it was always a fun one because students know the characters, but they also know the format of a fairy tale. They usually start with Once Upon a Time, and then they live happily ever after at the end. So you kind of see how it works. So the next one is under computational thinking. And this isn't one that I've necessarily read to a class, but I'm sure if I was still in a library that this would be something I would want to use. But this covers the concept area of computational thinking. And I know this is an area where I've had librarians go, I don't teach coding. I don't know coding. I can't do it. And I'm like, there's ways to teach coding without actually having to write code. You can teach the concepts of coding, and then it might kind of come back. And then in the future, they can code. And it goes a little bit into more detail than if you necessarily do an hour of code activity or some of the other coding curriculums that are out there. So this book is a story of a girl named Pearl, and she is at the beach. It's the end of summer vacation, and she wants to build a sandcastle. But there's several obstacles that prevent her from successfully building a sandcastle. So she brings her trusty robot, Pascal, down to the beach. He's rust-proof. There was a lot of kind of jokes that like adults would get, but kids might not necessarily get because they don't know the computer science yet. So there's a lot of puns on it. But she tries to break down the sandcastle problem of building them into manageable steps and creates a code for Pascal to build the sandbox. Now, or not the sandbox, the sandcastle. Now, there's some difficulty because the way Pearl tells Pascal to do it is not how Pascal understands it. And this is where I would always tell kids where computers are very literal. You have to be very specific in your instructions because they don't understand the nuances of like the human language. And when we say like certain things, they're not going to get it. And if you go out of order, then it messes everything up. What I also liked about this book is it also has that representation piece to it. So Pearl is a girl, and she is a person of color, and she is coding to be successful at something that interests her. So it kind of has that window mirror effect with books. And at the end of the book, it goes into a little bit more detail about the terms used for the coding. So it kind of has Pearl's and Pascal's guide to coding and in the back of the book. So if you're a teacher who's never done coding before and you're really not sure about these terms, such as sequencing and looping and if then else statements, they kind of go over it. So then you can see how they use it in the book and help your students translate it. And Margaret, I see your question. I can share it. I'll share it at the end, but it is Once Upon a Time Online. Okay. The last book that I'm going to kind of talk about is Hidden Figures. And this was made into a popular movie. And I originally went to go see if this was on my list, and I didn't have it on my list, but I had it in my collection at home for my computer science storybooks or my tech storybooks. And I was like, why didn't I include that? Because this is a great example of impacts of computing because we get to see how math and computer science are related. There's illustrations that show examples of how early computing happened, but it also gives that perspective of 4 Black women during the space race in a time where they were just thought of as calculators and they weren't great contributors to knowledge, but without these 4 women, the space race would not have been as successful as it was. This image on the cover is the picture book version. There is a young adult version and there's an adult version of the book. So all by Margot Lee Cheverly. And I've read the adult version and I've read the picture book version. I have not read this the young readers version is what they call it. And I know that I didn't use it in the classroom, but we had science teachers use it with middle school. And then they took the students on the field trip to kind of learn more about space at the Challenger Center. So this is a good book for representation of underrepresented groups in computer science. It teaches the impacts of computing, so going to outer space and the advancement of science, and shows the history. So I liked that one for impacts of computing. Now, networks and system design, I have trade books in these categories. Most of them are nonfiction. There's a couple fiction. But this was, again, that tough category for me to see how I would use it in the classroom. And networks and system design was kind of always my weakness when I was teaching computer science. And I would kind of just go with the pre-made stuff that other curriculums provided. And I need to grow more on that. So it's not my greatest. But there are some there in that list. So I kind of showed you guys the list already. It is not an exhaustive list. And I haven't read all the books, so I can't vouch for everything. But based on my searching through vendors and other people who have done unplugged activities with these books, these are good books to kind of get a starting point or even build up a collection so that you can kind of have them there for children to read. So when it comes to our collection development, I kind of focused earlier just on our direct instruction, how we can use these books in our classrooms, how can we tie them in. We can also build up our collection to promote, model, and kind of deepen student learning. We always want students to choose what they want to read, and having these books in the library can support these standards even if you're not leaving the instructions. So you can give students access. They'll motivate them to read, maybe read more, and maybe take that class. I think a big challenge that's happening in schools is not everybody is able to offer computer science yet at that high level, and students are interested in it, but they don't know enough. And the good thing about computer science, I feel too, is in coding, there's so many options out there that are free on the internet where students can kind of learn themselves, but then you also have your library to support it. In addition to collection development and having these books in your library, the idea where I got the trade book list was when New York State came out with the Common Core modules. At the end of the Common Core module, they had a list of trade books that they suggested as supplemental reading. And I would have teachers who would just print out that list of trade books, bring them to the library and say, get me as many as you can. And so to support those teachers and get more of those books, I would purchase them to have in the library. And so I wanted not just school librarians, but teachers to kind of have a starting point for supplemental material. So there's so many resources on the internet. There are some unplugged resources, but if you're not strong in technology, but you still want to talk about digital citizenship, or you want to talk about the impacts of computing, you can use these books as your starting point. So kind of the next steps, and what's great as we will finish early, so there'll be plenty of time for questions, but kind of what I was thinking was for my next steps, if I was still at Fillmore, or next steps for any school librarian or curriculum who want to increase computer science. Asked to be part of that curriculum committee working on computer science and digital fluency. I think librarians are often left out on curriculum development, but they can offer a lot of insight and support to our teachers in their grade level. It's also important to involve all grade levels. So K to 12, you don't have to meet all the K2 or the K1 standards in kindergarten. You have that band time frame to involve all grade levels. So you want to make sure that when computer science is being implemented, that it is being built upon it, and you can see from K to 1 who's doing what concept. And the biggest thing I want to remind everybody is not one teacher should be responsible for meeting all these standards. You can't just say, okay, librarians, computer science is all you, because it's not 100% in their wheelhouse. And I think that's what New York State had the idea with creating the standards, but also creating someone or a certified position for someone to meet those standards. And as we get more of those people, it might be a little easier, but the standards can definitely be met by everyone. Art, music, gym, there's ways to meet these. And it's good for everyone to collaborate and figure it out together. So other things you could do, add some of these books to your digital resources or your library collection. Um, there are plenty of digital resources out there, and it's kind of cool that now we have ebooks and we can read the ebooks, have them instantly, and be able to do things right on our computer. But the big thing is, don't try to reinvent the wheel. See what your district is already doing to meet those standards. So looking at some of these standards, there's a lot about sequencing, and that happens a lot in elementary. There's a lot of patterns that happen in math. You don't have to try to meet them all. You can see where they're being met elsewhere in the standards, or you can see what BOCES or Big Five can offer to help you. So I know at Erie 1 BOCES, it's not just me who are working on these standards. There's other people in model schools, but you can see what they have to offer to kind of supplement what you're doing or kind of get started. So I feel like that was a lot, and I wasn't sure on my timing. So we have quite a bit of extra time, about 25 minutes. So if there's any questions, let me know. You can either join in or enter in the chat, or oops. Okay, so again, I'll post the link to the resources. So that is the Wakelet resources. Yeah, everything. So this is my Wakelet resources. The slide deck is there. So Margaret, the title of the book with the picture is there. You can access it. The dot profile has all my contact information and any of my social media links. So any suggestion on how to inform teachers about standards and to work together to cover them, especially elementary. So I feel like, especially elementary, to focus on grade bands. So the grade bands for the standards are K1, 2, 3, and then 4, 6. So to me, what would make the most sense would be to get all the teachers, or at least representatives from each grade level and content area, and start to explore, like, where are we meeting them already? So looking at them kind of like I did with them and having them fill in the chart, like, okay, here's where we're meeting it. And then kind of divide and conquer, like, how else do you think you could cover these standards? So I know secondary is kind of a challenge because there's no New York State requirement for computer science classes for graduation, but they want to make sure every student is receiving computer science education. So I talked with some districts, and we talked about maybe having someone come in to present as an assembly on cybersecurity or networking, that type of thing. So hopefully that helps, Margaret. Okay. Susan asks, we're trying to emphasize media literacy at our district. Do you have any other recommendations of the lines of Project Look Sharp and Digital Detectives? So I'm not familiar with Digital Detectives, but I am familiar with Project Look Sharp, and I think it's a great resource. And I think you can tie media literacy into a lot of the computer science work. So just even looking at, like, okay, who do you think any of these trade books, who do you think they're marketed to? Why do you think vendors are marketing it that way? I feel like there's a big push to add diversity to computer science. And with that push, the books are trying to have student representation of different groups in their books. So that's a great way to talk about media literacy. And then you can also use media literacy to focus on, like, the implicit bias in computer science. So I know that was kind of brought up in the first session as well. But there is implicit bias in some of computer science algorithms, especially when we're talking about artificial intelligence and facial recognition software. Um, they're not. It's almost like the creators of those that code is not thinking beyond what they're used to. And it's traditionally been white men in the computer science field. That is changing because of initiatives. But so they don't think about the differences and the bias is built in. So I think there's definitely a lot of, I think media literacy can fit into anything that you just got to find the right way to do it. So I hope that helped as well. And I will look into digital detectives since many of you are. Any other questions for me? So the resources are there. This wakelet, the Computer Science and Digital Fluency, it is broken down by concept area for your standards. So you're able to see different resources. And within it, I not only have the standards, but also kind of the terms and general information. But you can see that resources by concept, there are not only like how to do activities, but also lessons and then just readings to help support your learning some more. I'm going to share. Next, I'm going to close my presentation. So there's the resources again. And then I did also want to share that my sources that I used while researching this. So okay, so connecting media literacy to a standard. I have to look again. I'm just bringing up the standards. I could see it being like IC5 and then see when I think of media literacy, I think more that digital literacy grade band. And then yep, number 7 sounds good. But also even like DL6 because it talks about the persistence of digital information and how it's shared online and kind of that presence and why are certain groups pushing out their information in that way on the internet. So, are they trying to create it? Is the digital presence for the purpose of selling something? Is it the purpose of swaying opinion? Is it the purpose of educating others? So, that's kind of how I also see media literacy. So I hope that helps you, Susan. You're welcome. And by no means am I the expert on this. This is just my experience and kind of how I interpret things. And it may be different in different areas, but I thank everybody for coming, and I appreciate that you came, and thank you.